The captain had simply nodded off for a moment during the flight. But when he woke up, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. The plane had deviated off course and was now flying over the Pacific Ocean. Worse yet, the fuel was about to run out. At this critical moment, he didn't dare reveal the truth to his teammates in the back. Telling them would only increase the risk of panic and disaster. What he needed to do now was call the control tower and request assistance as quickly as possible. Just as he connected the radio, he suddenly heard Japanese voices, which startled him into immediately shutting off the radio. He then switched to using Morse code to communicate. In an effort to lighten the aircraft, the captain jettisoned the heavy ammunition from the fighter jet into the Pacific Ocean. He then quickly turned the plane around, hoping to find the signal. Unfortunately, after flying back for a full 10 minutes, there was still no response. With fuel nearly depleted, the captain promptly informed the two teammates in the back to prepare for an emergency landing in the Pacific. The teammates, receiving the order, quickly gathered their belongings. Although the plane ultimately landed safely on the water, the violent impact damaged the cabin. It wouldn't be long before the plane sank to the bottom. In this dire situation, the captain quickly disembarked, inflated a life raft, and called for his teammates to help. But just as he turned around, he saw the plane sinking into the ocean. Thankfully, in the nick of time, the teammates managed to unfasten their seatbelts, narrowly escaping with their lives. Once back on the surface, the three quickly flipped the life raft over. However, the raft was so small that they had to sit tightly packed together upright. Little did they know the challenges that lay ahead. As night fell, the ocean breeze turned freezing cold. The three men, soaked to the skin, shivered uncontrollably, clutching their arms in a desperate attempt to stay warm. Luckily, they managed to endure until dawn. To their surprise, none of them had caught a cold, and when they woke up, they even played games as if nothing had happened. They believed it wouldn't be long before rescue arrived. But the captain remained deeply worried. He knew the vast Pacific Ocean was full of dangers, and to make matters worse, they had no food or water on board. Sure enough, by noon, the scorching summer sun left all three of them parched. Desperate, they took off their clothes to shield themselves from the sun. Only one of them, stubborn and defiant, refused to hide from the sun. Instead, he focused intently on the fishing hook in his hand. When no fish bit after a long wait, he angrily stripped off his clothes and jumped into the sea to cool off. Another teammate also wanted to take a dip, but the captain immediately stopped him. To ensure safety in the Pacific, at least two people had to stay on the raft at all times. Hearing this, the first teammate felt a chill run down his spine and quickly swam back to the raft with all his might. For everyone's safety, the captain decreed that no one was allowed near the edge of the raft to avoid attracting sharks lurking below. And so, they drifted on the open sea for 3 full days without a drop of water. The experienced captain, unable to bear it any longer, scooped up some seawater with his shoe and drank it. The next morning, the captain seemed somewhat revitalized. However, his teammates' conditions were worsening, and one even began hallucinating, mistaking the seawater for fresh water. Just as he was about to drink it, the captain stopped him in time. The three drifted for several more days. At this point, the captain suddenly realized there was a pencil in his pocket. His teammates thought it was no big deal, but the captain believed the pencil could be of great use. He drew several lines on his swimsuit and then used a compass to calculate the approximate crash location. Based on his calculations, the captain deduced that if they drifted southwest, they would soon reach an allied island. But how could they control the direction of the raft? The captain had an idea. He quickly used wire to hold the life jacket open, then threw it behind the raft. This makeshift rudder allowed them to steer the raft, sparking a glimmer of hope among the group. In just a few days, they could be rescued. Over the next few days, they took turns day and night, steering the raft. It was as if their desperate will to survive moved the heavens. That night, a torrential downpour suddenly began. They quickly used everything they had on the raft to collect the life-saving rainwater. With the fresh water replenishment, they regained some strength the next day. But without food for several more days, they faced a new challenge. How much longer could they survive in the world's largest ocean? They had been adrift in the Pacific Ocean for 5 days when one of the young men suddenly pulled out a knife and started frantically stabbing at the raft. The officer initially thought the man had gone mad, but the young man shouted that there seemed to be something in the water. The officer quickly stepped in to help and realized that the young man had caught a shark. To prevent it from escaping, they clung tightly to its body while their teammates stabbed its belly repeatedly with a knife. After a chaotic scene of blood and slashing, the shark stopped moving. They wasted no time slicing open its belly and pulling out a few small fish, which they devoured on the spot without hesitation. This was their first meal after 5 grueling days in the Pacific. After eating their fill, they packed the remaining fish meat into their socks, saving it for the days ahead. Once they were done, They began cleaning the blood from the raft, unaware that this very action would soon bring them to the brink of disaster. Sharks are highly sensitive to the scent of blood. Before long, their small raft was surrounded by a swarm of sharks. The officer quickly ordered everyone to stay away from the edge of the raft to avoid being attacked. And so, they endured until nightfall. By then, one of the young men, seemingly forgetting the officer's warning, reached out to wash his face in the water. In the next instant, a shark bit his hand. With poor visibility in the dark, the officer could only manage a rudimentary bandage for his teammate. Days passed, and soon they marked the 15th day of their ordeal in the Pacific. During this time, they survived by eating the leftover fish meat and drinking the fish juices. Fortunately, the bitten hand did not become infected. Desperate to leave the cursed ocean, they prayed daily to God, hoping for a rescue team to find them. But their prayers went unanswered, and no one came. One day, a teammate suddenly picked up a pistol. The officer asked what he was planning to do, and the man explained that he had spotted a seagull. After shooting the seagull, which fell dozens of meters away, the officer jumped into the sea to retrieve it. But just as he grabbed the bird's body, a shark, drawn by the scent of blood, began swimming toward him. The officer swam desperately back to the raft, narrowly making it on board just before the shark could bite him. They then ate the meat from the seagull. During the meal, one of the young men had a sudden idea. If there were birds in the area, could it mean they were close to land? However, the officer quickly dismissed this theory, explaining that seagulls have incredible flying capabilities, able to traverse the distance from Antarctica to the Arctic in just over 20 days. It was the 30th day of their drift in the Pacific Ocean. Prolonged dehydration had left all three of them gravely ill. Their bodies were weak, and they constantly felt the urge to sleep. Yet reality forced them to struggle on. With their weary arms, they propelled the small raft forward, clinging to the hope that one day, they would finally reach land. However, reality was cruel. A few days later, not only did their dream fail to materialize, but they also faced a massive storm. The three of them hurriedly took off their clothes to collect rainwater, thinking they might at least get a windfall of fresh water. But suddenly, the sky grew dark, thick with ominous clouds. The experienced officer immediately recognized this as the precursor to a hurricane. Terrified, he shouted to wake his companions and urged them to secure everything on the raft. Sure enough, a towering wave surged forward the next moment, sweeping one of the officers into the sea. Fortunately, he fought with all of his strength and managed to climb back onto the raft. But before they could even catch their breath, another massive wave slammed into them, throwing all three of them into the ocean. Their remaining food was also lost to the depths. Struggling against the waves, the officer swam back to the raft. He soon spotted one of his teammates, who had been swept away by the current. The group yelled at the top of their lungs and finally found him behind the raft. They clung to the overturned raft with all their strength. The officer suggested they use the waves to flip the raft upright. With synchronized effort, the three of them managed to turn the raft back over and clamber aboard. Huddling together, they endured the torturous night. When dawn broke the next day, their bodies and spirits were utterly shattered. The three lay helplessly on the raft, awaiting the inevitable arrival of death. However, after what felt like an eternity, one of the teammates suddenly noticed something ahead. In a mix of terror and disbelief, he realized it was an island. He quickly called out to the others. Once they confirmed that a small island was indeed visible in the distance, their despair turned into tears of joy. With every ounce of strength left in their bodies, they swam toward the island. On the 34th day of their ordeal, after drifting over 1,600 kilometers, they finally escaped the clutches of the Pacific Ocean. Their feet touched solid ground once more, and they were reborn into a new life.